There is a softness that only rises when the night turns silent enough for the smallest things inside you to speak. It doesn't arrive with force, and it doesn't seek attention. It simply appears slow and unannounced, like a quiet pulse beneath the stillness of everything around you. When the hour grows late and the world finally loosens its grip on your thoughts, that gentle ache begins to form its outline. It doesn't push forward. It just settles near the surface, waiting for you to notice it without trying to solve it. You may feel something tender tonight, something that didn't have the space to emerge earlier. During the day, you move through interruptions, tasks, noise, and the steady pull of small responsibilities. Every part of you is occupied. But the moment the world dims, something loosens. There is room for the weight you've been carrying without realizing it. And in that quiet expansion, the ache rises not sharp, not demanding, just present enough to feel familiar. It's a feeling that doesn't need a name. You might try to label it, to understand it, to connect it back to something that happened, or something you wish hadn't. But this ache doesn't come from a single moment. It comes from all the quiet spaces you pass through without pausing. It comes from the thoughts you softened so they wouldn't interrupt your day. It comes from the small pieces of you that never had time to rest. Tonight, they feel close, almost within reach, yet still too delicate to hold with words. You may find yourself breathing just a little slower now, not because you want to, but because the night has a way of lowering everything around you. The edges of your thoughts start to blur. The noise inside you begins to thin. A softness spreads through your chest, the kind that feels like warmth and weight at the same time. It doesn't feel overwhelming. It feels quiet. A kind of quiet only possible when the late hour has stripped away everything that kept you moving. The ache settles differently depending on the night. Sometimes it stays near your ribs, a low hum that rises when you exhale. Sometimes it presses into the hollow of your chest, not heavy, just steady. Other nights, it lingers behind your breathing, as if it has been waiting all day to unfurl. But no matter where it rests, it arrives with the same quiet honesty. It asks for nothing. It only releases what you didn't have room to feel earlier. There is something tender about the way it sits inside you, now almost like a soft presence, leaning close without touching. It doesn't open old wounds. It doesn't bring sharp memories. It simply makes you aware of a space within you that usually stays dim. A place where the heart speaks in whispers, not in stories. A place where emotion isn't loud enough to overwhelm you, but steady enough to remind you that you are still carrying something you have not named. As you move through this dim hour, you might notice that the room feels wider than it did earlier. Shadows soften. Corners blur. The air seems slower, almost thick with stillness. In that shift, the ache deepens, not in pain, but in presence. It fills the quiet the way a faint glow fills a dark room. Not enough to illuminate everything, but enough to reveal a gentle outline of what lives inside you. It's strange how honest your heart becomes at this time of night. Not dramatic, not urgent, not overwhelmed, just honest. There is a translucence to your feelings, as if they have thinned enough for you to see through them without being pulled in. The ache rests in that translucence. It doesn't overwhelm you. It simply lets itself be seen. You may find yourself remembering small things, moments that didn't seem important, earlier things you brushed past without noticing. A tone in someone's voice, a sentence that lingered longer than it should have, a moment when you wished you had spoken, a moment when you wish someone else had. These aren't heavy memories. They are quiet echoes, and they rise now because the night has cleared enough space for them to breathe. The ache doesn't grow from these echoes. It sits alongside them. It isn't sharp enough to hurt and not light enough to disappear. It lives in the in-between, a softness shaped by everything you didn't pause long enough to feel. And somehow, the stillness of this hour holds it gently without asking it to lessen or fade. You might not even notice when your breathing falls into rhythm with the quiet. It isn't something you control. It happens naturally, as if your body knows how to settle into the spaces the day didn't allow. In that rhythm, the ache shifts again. It doesn't deepen or disappear. It simply becomes more familiar, a muted warmth behind the pulse of your thoughts. Tonight, the ache is not here to burden you. It is here to reflect you, to show you the part of yourself that speaks more softly than your worries, more quietly than your fears, more gently than your regrets. It is the part that rises only when the world dims enough for you to hear it. And in its softness, you can finally sense the tenderness you've carried without noticing. Nothing about it needs resolution. Nothing about it needs to change. Tonight, it is enough that the ache exists, that it found you only after midnight, when everything was quiet enough for you to feel how tender you truly are beneath everything you hold. There is a moment in the late hours when the quiet around you becomes a little heavier, not in a way that overwhelms, but in a way that feels like the night is folding itself closer to your skin. It doesn't ask you to think deeply, and it doesn't pull you into anything dramatic. It simply settles, wrapping the room in a softness that makes every small inward shift feel clearer than it did before. And in this slow, thickening of quiet, the tenderness inside you begins to stretch in a way that feels strangely natural, as if this hour was the only place it was allowed to breathe fully. You might notice how time feels slightly different now, not rushing, not lingering, just drifting with a gentle pace that your body unconsciously falls into. The seconds move in a slow, steady rhythm, and somewhere inside you, something matches that rhythm without effort. The ache you carried earlier widens just a little, not to hurt you, but to make space for itself in a way that feels more stable, more grounded, more real. It rests deeper in your chest, settling with the kind of softness that feels like a quiet pulse rather than a weight. There's something about this hour that brings out the subtle truths you tuck away during the day. When everything brightens outside, you move through your hours with a kind of momentum that keeps these truths dimmed in the background. But when midnight settles over you, when the world falls into its gentler breathing, those truths drift forward. Not forcefully, just naturally, as if the night gives them permission to step into the open without fear of being too much. You may find that your mind moves differently too. Thoughts that were loud or scattered earlier become slower, smoother, as if softened by the dim light around you. The ache doesn't sharpen under this gentleness. Instead, it dissolves into a warm, muted throb that rises only when the quiet becomes deep enough. And now, in this softened atmosphere, you begin to sense the difference between loneliness and solitude, between emptiness and space, between ache and presence. These differences are delicate, almost fragile, but they speak with a clarity that only midnight allows. As you breathe, the air feels slightly thicker, carrying a stillness that encourages you to lower your shoulders without thinking. That small release creates a ripple inside you, a shift that moves through your chest with a slow, almost imperceptible warmth. It's the kind of warmth that reminds you that even the quietest emotions still live somewhere within you, shaping the spaces you rarely enter while the world is awake. Tonight, the ache changes texture. It no longer feels like something waiting to be solved. Instead, it feels like something that has softened into a part of you, something woven gently through your thoughts, through your breathing, through the space between one quiet heartbeat and the next. It doesn't weigh you down. It doesn't pull you inward. It simply exists as a tender reminder of how deeply you experience the world, even in the silence. As the room grows dimmer, shadows blur, softening into shapes that don't ask to be interpreted. The quiet smooths the edges of everything, even the parts of you that feel tender or uncertain. And in that smoothing, the ache settles in a way that doesn't feel sharp or defined. It becomes a presence rather than a feeling, something that exists alongside you rather than inside you. There are nights when you can sense this ache more strongly, when the quiet amplifies the small things you haven't said, the breaths you've held, without noticing the weight of moments you carried longer than you meant to. But tonight, it doesn't push those things toward you. It lets them drift. It lets them breathe. It lets them exist without demanding your attention. The ache is gentle, steady, and considerate, almost as if it knows you are meeting it halfway. You might find yourself remembering little fragments, nothing dramatic, nothing sharp, just soft memories, like the echo of a moment you brushed aside earlier, a glance you didn't think about, a silence that lasted slightly longer than expected, a thought that lingered at the edge of your mind but never fully formed. These memories don't come as regrets. They come as quiet reminders of the subtle ways your heart responds to the world. In this hour, your sensitivity rises not in a fragile way, but in a quiet, perceptive way. You sense more. You feel more. You notice more. The night slows, everything giving you space to understand the parts of yourself that don't speak loudly enough to be heard during the day. And the ache moves with that understanding, softening even further, resting as gently as a faint glow in a dark room. As time continues to slip by, you may feel a shift, not a sudden one, but a gradual easing of something inside you. The ache doesn't disappear, but it becomes calmer, more fluid, less defined by shape, and more defined by warmth. It spreads through your inner space like a thin layer of quiet covering everything evenly. Not pressing, not pulling, just settling. You begin to realize that this ache is not here because something is wrong. It's here because you are finally still enough to feel what has been quietly living beneath your surface. It is the part of you that holds softness even when you don't show it. The part that recognizes when something inside you needs gentleness rather than answers. The part that finds its voice only after the world has gone silent. Tonight, that ache is not a burden. It is a companion, a soft echo of everything tender within you, a reminder that you carry depth even in your quietest moments. And as the night deepens, that softness remains close, not to overwhelm you, but to keep you company until the morning begins to lift it away again. There is a point in the night when the quiet no longer feels like something around you, but something you are moving through, almost as if the air itself has thickened into a soft layer that slows every inward shift. It doesn't feel heavy, and it doesn't feel cold. It simply feels present, like a muted warmth that has absorbed the remnants of the day and now holds them gently in suspension. In this softened space, the ache inside you begins to reveal itself with more clarity, not louder, not sharper, just more visible in its subtlety. The hour has deepened past the familiar stillness of midnight and into something quieter, something more internal. Your breathing falls into a rhythm that doesn't demand intention, but aligns naturally with the dimness surrounding you. The room feels slightly different now, not because anything has changed, but because your senses are more attuned to the subtleties of the darkness. The edges of objects blur, shadows settle into softer forms, and the silence stretches long enough for the slower parts of your mind to rise to the surface. You may notice that your thoughts begin to drift with more fluidity, not jumping from one place to another, but moving in slow arcs that circle gently before dissolving. There is no urgency, no pressure to make sense of anything. Instead, there is only the quiet motion of your inner world shifting in small currents beneath the surface. And in these currents, the ache deepens in a way that feels warm rather than painful, as if it were something your heart has grown accustomed to carrying. The night seems to lower itself around you, settling closer to your skin, softening your pulse, smoothing the tension you didn't realize lingered in your shoulders. You may feel a subtle heaviness behind your sternum, not a burden, not a strain, just a presence that sits quietly, reminding you of the spaces within you that rarely receive attention. This presence doesn't intrude. It simply hums in the background of your breathing, a steady note in the quiet atmosphere. Sometimes, without trying, you become aware of a slight trembling within your thoughts, not a fear, not a sorrow, but a tenderness that rises when your mind has finally slowed enough to touch the softer parts of itself. This tenderness is what shapes the ache tonight. It gives it texture, depth, and warmth. It makes it feel less like a wound and more like a part of you that has been waiting for the right hour to stretch open. The late night has a way of clearing space inside you, space that daylight fills too quickly with movement and noise. In this cleared space, your emotions don't need to be loud to be felt. They can exist in whispers. They can form gently without demanding interpretation. And the ache moves with that gentleness, expanding slowly as if every breath gives it a little more room. There is a quiet honesty in this softness, one that doesn't push you toward answers, but toward awareness. You may sense memories resurfacing, not sharp, not dramatic, just small impressions that drift back into your consciousness. The way a certain moment lingered longer than you expected. The way your chest tightened at a sentence you brushed off. The way a silence earlier today felt deeper than usual. These impressions do not rise to be analyzed. They rise simply because the night makes space for them. As the hour stretches, the ache becomes more fluid, almost like a subtle warmth flowing through your inner spaces. It doesn't stay in one place. It shifts with your breathing, moving gently from your chest to your ribs, to the quiet place behind your thoughts. You may not even notice the transitions at first. They happen slowly, naturally, like the dimming of a light you weren't looking directly at. You might feel a subtle pull inward, a draw toward the center of yourself, where emotions linger longer and thoughts settle more deeply. This pull is not uncomfortable. It feels like a soft gravity, something steady and unhurried that encourages reflection without pressure. In this inner gravity, the ache feels both closer and calmer. It moves in waves that do not break, only rise and fall with the rhythm of the night. There are moments in this hour when you become aware of how quiet your mind has become. The chatter fades, the noise dissolves, the inner landscape smooths into a gentle stillness, and in that stillness, the ache reveals itself as something almost kind, a warmth that coats the fragile parts of you, offering a softness that daylight does not always allow. This ache is not an enemy. It is something softer, an echo of your capacity to feel deeply, even when you do not show it. It is the quiet proof that something inside you remains open, responsive, tender. And as the night deepens further, this tenderness becomes clearer, more defined in its gentle presence. Time moves differently now. Minutes feel like slow ripples spreading across still water. And with each ripple, the ache finds a new shape. Sometimes it expands. Sometimes it contracts. Sometimes it brightens slightly, like a faint warmth under your skin. Other times, it dims resting as a subtle throb beneath your breath. But it never disappears. It stays with you, not as a reminder of anything painful, but as a companion to your quietest parts. Tonight, the ache is simply telling you that you are human in the softest possible way, that beneath everything you carry, there is a tenderness that needs the quiet to be felt. And the night patient and dim holds that tenderness without asking it to turn into anything else. The ache stays with you, gently resting in the late hour stillness, steady as the slow pulse beneath your breathing. It will soften, shift, and settle as the night moves forward. But for now, it remains exactly as it is, warm, quiet, and undeniably yours. There is a certain depth the night reaches that feels different from the hours before it. Not darker, not heavier, just deeper, as if the quiet has gathered itself into a soft pool around you. It holds its own kind of stillness, one that slows everything inside you to a pace your heart can finally match. In this depth, the ache within you begins to unfold in ways you didn't notice earlier. It doesn't sharpen. Instead, it stretches, lengthening into the spaces that have opened inside your thoughts. You may notice that your breathing falls into a rhythm that feels almost detached from the rest of the world. Each inhale moves gently through your chest, and each exhale leaves behind a soft trail of warmth. This rhythm is not intentional. It is simply what your body does when the noise of the day has dissolved enough for you to feel the quieter truths beneath it. And in this rhythm, the ache begins to move, as if it were a tide, rising slowly behind your ribs. The room around you has grown still, but not empty. Shadows feel softer, the dimness feels warmer, and the silence has its own texture, now thick, smooth, and steady. Within that texture, the ache finds a place to rest. It leans into the quiet rather than resisting it. It breathes with you, matching the slow cadence of the late hour. And in those slow breaths, something inside you opens just a little more, allowing the ache to settle without tension. There is something tender about how the ache sits tonight. It doesn't scratch at old memories, nor does it push you toward anything unresolved. It exists the way soft light exists, gently, without urgency. It feels like a presence rather than an emotion, something that accompanies you rather than weighs you down. And in that presence, you may sense a faint warmth spreading through your chest, subtle but steady. As your thoughts drift, they no longer feel scattered or sharp. They slow into soft shapes, impressions rather than statements, currents rather than conclusions. They move the way dust moves in a quiet room, rising and falling with the smallest changes in the air. And with each drift, you feel the ache align itself with these movements, shifting gently, never settling in one exact place for long. You might feel something loosening inside you, something you didn't realize had been held tight. The late hour uncovers it, not to expose it, but to soften it. It feels like a small release, the kind that doesn't show itself until the world is quiet enough to notice. And when it releases, the ache changes shape again. It becomes smoother, more fluid, more like a faint glow than a weight. This glow isn't bright. It is subtle, muted, the kind of warmth that doesn't demand attention. It stays low in your chest, where your quietest feelings gather, feelings that respond more to silence than to language. And as it grows, you might sense a strange comfort in how familiar it feels, as if it has been with you for longer than you realized. There are moments when the ache seems to expand slightly, brushing against old thoughts that rise only in the softest hours. A memory that stayed unresolved, a tenderness you never expressed, a moment that still tugs at the edge of your mind. But none of these moments sharpen the ache. Instead, they soften with it, merging into the same warm stillness that fills the room. Tonight, your thoughts do not spiral. They drift. They do not demand answers. They settle. The ache does not cling to anything specific. It simply hums through the spaces the night has cleared. And in that hum, you can sense the layers within yourself, separating gently the old from the new, the heavy from the tender, the quiet from the quieter. The deeper the night becomes, the more your mind shifts into a state that feels almost suspended, not asleep, not fully awake, but somewhere in between, where every thought carries a kind of softness you cannot reach during the day. In this suspended place, the ache becomes something you observe rather than endure. You watch it the way you might watch a faint ripple on still water, subtle, delicate, steady. You may find yourself feeling more centered, not because the ache has lessened, but because you have settled into a slower rhythm that makes room for it. You begin to sense the deeper layers beneath the ache, the quiet resilience, the muted longing, the tenderness you rarely acknowledge. These layers are soft, nearly translucent, woven through the quiet in delicate strands. As you sit with these layers, a calmness spreads through you that is not driven by resolution, but by presence. Nothing needs to be fixed. Nothing needs to be understood. The ache is no longer something that presses. It becomes a companion to the stillness around you, a gentle presence that fills the silence without overwhelming it. There is a certain peace in realizing that not everything inside you needs clarity to feel real. Some emotions exist only to remind you that you are capable of depth even on the quietest nights. And tonight, that depth feels like a soft, warm curve inside your chest, steady, quiet, and undeniably human. You do not need to name it. You do not need to hold it tightly. You only need to let it exist in this dim hour where the night wraps around you and the ache rests gently beneath your breathing. It is enough that it is here, unfolding quietly, staying close, without pressing, warming the tender spaces inside you as the night deepens further. There is a point in the night when the stillness turns almost fragile, as if the quiet itself could break if you move too quickly or breathe too deeply. It's not an uneasy fragility, more like the delicate calm that settles over a lake just before dawn, where every ripple slows until the surface becomes a soft mirror. In this fragile calm, the ache inside you shifts again. It becomes thinner, lighter, almost translucent, as if the late hour has smoothed its edges until only its warmth remains. You may feel something loosening behind your ribs, a slow release of tension you didn't realize had lingered throughout the day. It doesn't arrive suddenly. It unfolds the way a dim glow spreads across a shadowed room, gentle, patient, steady. This release gives the ache space to breathe, but it doesn't enlarge it. Instead, the ache softens, flattening into a quiet layer across your chest, subtle enough to feel comforting rather than heavy. The room around you seems quieter than before, though nothing has changed. It's your awareness that has shifted. Your senses have tuned themselves to the softer frequencies of the night, the faint hum of the air, the stillness resting on the furniture, the gentle weight of the hour pressing against the windows. These small details fade during the day, but now they speak with a muted clarity. And as they soften, so do you. Your breathing deepens without intention, falling naturally into a slower rhythm. Each inhale feels like it gathers the coolness of the room, and each exhale lets it settle into the warm spaces inside you. This rhythm creates a subtle sway in your body, a quiet rocking you can sense more than you can see. And within that sway, the ache blends with your breath, rising softly as you inhale, settling gently as you exhale. There are moments when something almost like longing flickers inside you, not a sharp longing, not tied to any specific memory, but a gentle pull towards something you can't fully name. This pull doesn't hurt. It feels more like the echo of a feeling that once had shape, but now exists only as a soft impression. The night holds this impression carefully, as if protecting its fragility. You don't need to reach for it. You only need to let it drift. You may notice that your thoughts begin to move with a kind of slow translucence. They don't arrive as sentences or conclusions. They appear more as faint outlines, suggestions of emotions, hints of memories, whispers of moments that have softened over time. These outlines don't demand clarity. They drift through your awareness like shadows moving across dim light, revealing themselves only enough to remind you they are still part of you. In this drifting, the ache changes again. It becomes less like a throb and more like a gentle vibration beneath your breathing. It hums quietly through your chest, not with urgency, but with a kind of quiet insistence that reminds you of the life beneath your stillness. This hum grounds you. It keeps you tethered to your inner world, even as the night invites you deep into its quiet. There is a tender honesty in what the night reveals about you. In these hours, your emotions do not compete for space. They settle into layers, some close to the surface, some lingering deeper, all moving with the same soft rhythm. These layers do not feel overwhelming. They feel true. And in that truth, the ache becomes something you can rest alongside, rather than something you need to resist. As time stretches further into the night, your awareness shifts inward. Not sharply, not dramatically, but with a gradual descent that feels almost natural. You slip into the quieter parts of yourself, the parts that rise only when the world outside has fully dimmed. Here, the ache thins even more, spreading across your inner landscape like a layer of warmth that asks for nothing except to be acknowledged. You might feel the urge to close your eyes, not from tiredness, but from a need to sense the night from within rather than through sight. With your eyes closed, the quiet deepens. The soft pulse of your breathing becomes more noticeable, and the ache settles into a space just beneath your awareness where it no longer feels like an emotion, but like a texture, a soft, warm texture lining the inside of your chest. In this darkness, your thoughts loosen further. They drift without direction, forming and dissolving in slow motion. You might sense a memory brushing lightly against your mind's edge, but it won't press forward. The night doesn't push you toward what hurts. It only reveals what has been softened enough to be held without strain. There is something healing in this level of quiet, something that moves through you without the need for language. The ache becomes part of that movement. It flows gently through your inner spaces as if mapping the contours of your tenderness. And as it moves, you feel less like you are carrying something and more like something within you is settling, aligning, finding its place. The air feels warmer now, though it hasn't changed. The warmth comes from inside you, from the way the ache has softened into an almost serene presence. It is no longer something you are trying to understand. It is something you are allowing yourself to feel. And in that allowance, the ache becomes almost beautiful in its quiet honesty. The late hour holds you gently, as if wrapping itself around the most delicate parts of your heart. It doesn't ask you to let go of the ache. It simply asks you to sit with it, breathe with it, feel it in its softest form. And as you do, the ache transforms not into joy, not into sadness, but into a calm recognition of your own depth. Tonight, the ache is not something you overcome. It is something you meet. And in meeting it with this much softness, you discover how quietly resilient you are, even in the most fragile hours of the night. There is a certain depth the night reaches where the silence around you no longer feels like an absence of sound, but a presence in itself, something soft, steady, and expansive. It spreads across the room in a slow drift, smoothing the edges of everything it touches. In that drift, the ache inside you begins to move differently. It becomes quieter, not because it has lessened, but because the night has grown still enough to hold it without letting it echo. You may notice that your body feels heavier in a gentle way, as if the quiet has settled on your skin, like a thin layer of warmth. Your shoulders loosen without effort. Your breathing deepens, not from fatigue, but from a kind of surrender to the calm that surrounds you. And in this surrender, the ache inside your chest settles into its softest shape, yet warm, muted almost like a slow pulse beneath your ribs. The light in the room, whatever faint glow remains, dims enough that your attention turns inward. Not sharply, not suddenly. It's more like a gradual tilting, a natural shift toward the spaces within you that only open when the world outside has relaxed its grip on your thoughts. You may feel the subtle pull of those inner spaces calling you closer, inviting you into the tender quiet that rests just beneath your surface. As you lean deeper into this inner quiet, the ache begins to widen. It spreads through your chest, in thin, gentle currents that feel almost like slow waves moving through warm water. These waves do not disrupt anything. They simply move soft and steady, reshaping the contours of your inner world without pressing or demanding. In their movement, you can sense the parts of yourself that have grown tired, the parts that have stayed silent, the parts that ache not from pain, but from softness. You might feel a subtle tremor inside your thoughts, a delicate flicker of emotion rising from somewhere deep and unhurried. This flicker is not a memory, not a regret, not a longing. It is more like a faint awareness of everything you've held quietly throughout the day. Small moments of sensitivity, unspoken thoughts, gentle disappointments, tender hopes that never fully surfaced. These things gather now, not as weight, but as warmth. The night feels deeper around you, almost as if it has lowered itself enough to meet you where you truly are. And in that lowering, something inside your chest loosens further. You may feel it as a slow sigh, one that releases a tension you did not realize you carried. The sigh doesn't empty anything. It simply softens the ache, spreading it more evenly through your inner space until it feels less like a point and more like a quiet atmosphere. Your thoughts drift again, but more slowly this time. They do not spiral. They do not sink. They float lightly, gently, like particles suspended in dim water. Each thought has a softness to it, a muted glow that keeps it from becoming sharp or overwhelming. And as they float, the ache moves with them, aligning itself to the rhythm of your drifting mind. There's something comforting about how honest your emotions become in this hour. Not loud, not dramatic, just honest. You feel them as they are, without the distortion of daylight or the pressure of expectation. And in that honesty, the ache takes on a new texture. It feels less like an unanswered question and more like a quiet truth about your inner world. A truth that exists even when you are moving through brighter hours. You might find yourself sensing the outlines of memories, not the sharp details, but the soft impressions left behind. A moment where your heart tightened slightly. A quiet disappointment you walked past. A tenderness you felt but didn't express. These impressions drift to the surface now, not to trouble you, but to show you the quieter layers beneath your strength. Layers that stay hidden until the night becomes deep enough to hold them. In this hour, the ache becomes a companion rather than a burden. It moves through your chest with a warmth that feels almost alive, steady, gentle present. It hums beneath your breathing, syncing with the natural rise and fall of your chest. And as the hum deepens, you recognize it as something familiar, something you've carried for longer than you can remember, something you understand without needing to name. The deeper the night gets, the more the ache softens. It becomes part of the quiet blending into the dimness of the room until you can feel it without focusing on it. It's like a faint echo of your heart's most tender parts, pulsing gently in the stillness. And the stillness holds it without resistance, allowing it to exist without shaping it into pain. You may sense a subtle warmth rising in your chest, not from comfort, but from recognition. The recognition that you are made of quiet layers, soft emotions, fragile hopes that surface only when the world around you grows gentle enough. The ache tonight is a reminder of that. It shows you the parts of yourself that feel deeply even when you do not speak. the parts that respond to silence with openness, the parts that soften in darkness because they do not fear being seen. As your breath slows into an even calmer rhythm, the ache widens further, but in a way that feels soothing. It spreads across your chest like a warm layer of dusk, smoothing the edges of your thoughts and dimming the intensity of everything inside you. There is no urgency left in it, only gentleness, only softness, only the quiet movement of emotion settling into its rightful place. Tonight, the ache is not asking you to understand it. It is asking you to feel it, to recognize the tenderness it carries, to sit with it in the depth of the night where everything you hold becomes softer, quieter, more honest. And as you sit with it now, breathing slowly, wrapped in the dimness of this hour, the ache remains close, not heavy, not demanding, just close enough to remind you that even in quiet, you are deeply alive. There is a moment deep into the night when the quiet settles into its own kind of still gravity, drawing everything inside you into a slower, more delicate rhythm. It isn't heavy, and it isn't cold. It is the kind of gravity that wraps softly around your thoughts, smoothing their edges until they float rather than move. In that gravity, the ache inside you begins to stretch differently. It no longer rises or pulses. It simply expands, unfurling into the dimness in a way that feels almost natural. You may sense your body loosening further, as if the night has placed a gentle hand across your shoulders. Your breath deepens on its own, settling into a steady pattern that matches the muted silence around you. Each inhale feels like it passes through warm shadows, and each exhale carries a softness that spreads through your chest. And with every breath, the ache becomes less of a point and more of an atmosphere, thin, warm, and steady. The room feels suspended now, held in a quiet that doesn't move forward or backward. Time drifts instead of passing. Minutes stretch into soft lines you can't quite measure, and somewhere, within those stretched minutes, the ache settles into a space behind your thoughts, where it hums gently without shaping them. It feels almost like a presence at the edge of your awareness, steady enough to sense but too soft to grasp. Your mind may begin to drift through small, quiet impressions, nothing vivid, nothing sharp. A faint echo of something you once felt, a moment you brushed aside, a softness that rose unexpectedly earlier in the day. These impressions don't arrive as memories. They appear more like emotional textures, drifting through your awareness the way light drifts across a dim room. And as they drift, the ache aligns with them, forming a warm layer beneath their movement. There are parts of you that only awaken in this hour, not because they are hidden, but because they need the night's tenderness to surface. These parts feel delicate, like threads of emotion woven into your breathing. They do not speak in words. They speak in subtle sensations, a looseness in your chest, a warmth behind your ribs, a faint trembling you notice only when the silence becomes complete. And the ache moves through these sensations with a gentleness that keeps them from overwhelming you. You may notice that your thoughts become quieter, almost like they've sunk a little deeper into your mind. They no longer sit at the surface. They float beneath it, moving at a slower pace that matches the rhythm of the night. And in that slower pace, the ache softens even further. It becomes a calm, warm presence that rests just behind your heartbeat, steady and tender. There is something about this hour that makes your inner world feel larger. not empty or larger. As if your emotions have room to stretch without pressing against anything. The ache fills part of that space, but not in a way that crowds. It spreads thinly across the quiet, forming a soft current you can feel beneath your stillness. It doesn't ask anything of you. It simply rises and falls with your breath, a quiet reminder that your heart remains open, even in the calmest moments. You might feel a subtle heaviness in your limbs, not fatigue, but a groundedness that comes from settling into the dimness fully. This groundedness connects you more deeply to what you feel. It draws your attention inward, toward the subtle warmth beneath your ribs, toward the faint hum of the ache resting near your breathing. And the more grounded you become, the softer the ache feels, as if it were dissolving slowly into the quiet. As you move deeper into the night, the silence begins to feel almost textured, not empty, textured. A mix of soft air, dim warmth, and the faint pulse of your emotions weaving gently beneath it. That texture holds your ache with remarkable steadiness, giving it space to exist without magnifying it. And in that space, the ache becomes something you can sit beside without discomfort. There is a tenderness to this kind of quiet, a tenderness you don't often feel when the world is bright and demanding. It allows you to sense the softer parts of yourself, the ones that ache not from pain, but from sensitivity. The ones that feel deeply, even when you don't speak. The ones that recognize silence as a kind of refuge. And tonight, the ache mirrors that tenderness resting lightly across your inner landscape. You may feel a faint shimmer of emotion rising behind your thoughts, not sharp, not heavy. Just a gentle awareness of everything you've held quietly throughout the day. Little things you didn't linger on. Moments that brushed against you without leaving their weight. These things gather now, not to trouble you, but to soften you. And that softness blends seamlessly with the ache, creating a warm, dim glow beneath your breathing. The deeper the night becomes, the easier it is to feel the stillness inside you. It isn't a stillness of emptiness, but of fullness, of quiet feelings resting in gentle shapes. The ache becomes one of those shapes. It curves softly through your chest, steady and warm, almost like a slow tide that never breaks. Its presence no longer pulls at you. It simply accompanies you, breathing with you, settling with you, staying with you. You may sense the faintest shift inside your chest, a tiny release, a subtle easing. It comes not from understanding the ache, but from allowing it to exist without interference. And when that easing happens, the ache softens into something almost soothing. It becomes a quiet warmth that settles beneath your thoughts, carrying a tenderness that feels both fragile and steady. Tonight, the ache is neither a question nor a burden. It is a gentle companion to the depth of the night, resting in the soft spaces you rarely touch when the world is bright. It moves with the quiet hums with your breath and settles into the dimness like a warm shadow. And as the hour drifts forward, you feel the ache lingering with you, not to weigh you down, but to keep you connected to your own softness in this quiet, fragile stretch of night. There is a point in the night when the quiet no longer feels like something around you, but something that has seeped into you, filling the spaces between your thoughts with a softness that words cannot quite capture. It is a quiet that moves slowly, almost tenderly, wrapping itself around the faintest pieces of your inner world. And in that gentle wrapping, the ache inside you begins to settle into yet another form, lighter, thinner, almost as if it were dissolving into the dimness. Your breath rises and falls with an ease that feels different from earlier in the night. Each inhale carries a faint coolness, and each exhale leaves behind a trace of warmth that lingers in your chest. The ache responds to this warmth. It stretches across the quiet, soft, and steady, no longer pulsing or trembling, just existing in a way that feels almost peaceful. Not absent, just calmer, quieter, more woven into your breathing than before. The room feels suspended again, held in a kind of stillness that makes time difficult to measure. You're not sure how long you've been here in this softness. Minutes feel like they blur into each other, creating a gentle rhythm that your thoughts drift into. These thoughts do not come with sharpness. They drift like slow-moving shapes, carrying only the faintest hints of meaning. And with each drift, the ache shifts just enough to remind you it is still present, still warm, still tender. Somewhere inside you, a subtle heaviness settles, a heaviness that doesn't feel burdensome. It feels grounding, as if the quiet has placed a soft weight across your chest to keep you from floating too far into your thoughts. This grounding makes the ache easier to sit with. It no longer feels like something separate from you. It feels like a natural part of your inner landscape, like a warm patch of dim light resting gently in the center of your chest. You may notice a faint sensation behind your sternum, something like a slow blooming of warmth. It doesn't spread quickly. It expands in quiet increments, opening just enough to soften the ache further. This opening is delicate, not dramatic, not sudden. It is the kind of opening that happens only when your mind has quieted enough to feel its own depth. And tonight, that depth feels more accessible than it has in a long time. As the night continues, your thoughts become thinner, almost translucent. They float beneath your awareness, moving without urgency or sharpness. You don't chase them. You don't analyze them. You simply feel the subtle shifts they create inside you. And in those shifts, the ache settles deeper, not with weight, but with familiarity. It becomes something like a quiet signature of your emotional landscape, soft, warm, steady. There is something deeply human about how your emotions behave in this hour. They do not rush. They do not demand. They simply rise and settle with the rhythm of the night. And your ache mirrors this rhythm. It is softened so much that it feels more like a gentle hum than an ache. A hum that pulses behind your ribs, warm and muted, almost comforting in its consistency. You may feel a slight tightening in your throat, not from sadness, but from tenderness. A tenderness that surfaces only when the world around you has dimmed enough for your inner voice to speak softly. This tenderness isn't tied to any single memory or thought. It is woven from all the quiet moments in your life that left an imprint too soft to name. And as it rises, the ache aligns with it, warming the space beneath your chest with gentle familiarity. If you let your awareness settle deeper, you might sense the subtle textures of your emotions, the thin layers of warmth, the soft edges of longing, the gentle swell of introspection. None of these textures feel overwhelming. They feel delicate, suspended, held carefully by the silence that surrounds you. And the ache traces these textures, moving in slow arcs through your inner landscape, smoothing everything it touches. The night grows deeper still. The air feels warmer, though the temperature hasn't changed. The warmth comes from within you, from the way the ache has softened enough to become a kind of internal glow. This glow does not brighten. It stays low, dim steady, but it is enough to illuminate the quietest parts of your heart, the parts that rarely find space during the day. You may find yourself feeling strangely comforted by the ache now, not because it brings clarity, but because it brings connection. It connects you to your own tenderness, your own capacity for depth, your own quiet resilience. It reminds you that even when the world pulls you outward, there is a part of you that remains soft, steady, and deeply alive beneath it all. There is no need to interpret this feeling, no need to trace its origins. It exists simply because the night has become gentle enough for it to breathe. And as it breathes, the ache becomes almost beautiful in its stillness. It feels like a soft shadow resting beneath your heartbeat, delicate and warm, holding your inner world with remarkable care. You may not realize how deeply this quiet affects you until you notice how calm your body has become. Your breath falls into long, smooth waves. Your shoulders have fully released their tension. Your thoughts drift without friction. And the ache settled now into its softest shape feels less like something you carry and more like something that keeps you company. Tonight, the ache is not a question, not a wound, not a worry. It is a quiet presence in the deepest part of the night, reflecting the softest version of yourself back to you. And in this quiet, you recognize a truth you rarely pause long enough to feel. Even in your most tender moments, you are never empty. There is always a warmth within you, soft, steady, alive, waiting for the night to unfold it gently. There is a depth the night only reaches when it has stretched far past midnight, when the silence no longer feels like something sitting in the room with you, but something that has entered your breathing, your thoughts, your chest. It becomes part of you in a way that feels gentle, almost protective. And in that depth, the ache inside you shifts once more. It doesn't fade. It doesn't sharpen. It settles into a form that feels quieter, warmer, almost like a small ember resting beneath everything you feel. Your breathing moves more slowly now, steady and unforced. Each inhale sweeps softly through your chest, and each exhale warms the space the ache occupies. The ache responds in its usual way, subtle, patient, without urgency. It hums beneath your ribs like a faint vibration, a presence that has learned to move in rhythm with you rather than against you. It no longer feels like something you are carrying. It feels like something that simply exists within you, aligning itself to the quiet the night has drawn out. You may notice that your thoughts no longer drift the way they did earlier. They move even slower now, sinking into a deeper layer of your awareness, where they become less like thoughts and more like sensations, soft, muted impressions that rise only briefly before dissolving into the dimness. In this slowed down state, the ache spreads across your chest in thin waves, each one softer than the last, each one settling into a deeper, calmer shape. The room feels more distant somehow, as if the darkness has created a gentle separation between you and everything outside your inner world. You feel contained within your own quiet, not isolated but cocooned. The silence around you becomes a soft envelope that holds your emotions with a care you rarely feel in daylight. And within that envelope, the ache feels more honest, more open, more willing to be gently felt. There may be a faint heaviness rising behind your eyes, not sadness, not tiredness, but the subtle weight of emotion softening into transparency. A kind of emotional thinning that makes every feeling inside you glide rather than press. And the ache moves with that thinning, smoothing itself across your inner space until it feels like a warm line of dim light rather than a tightness. This is the hour when small truths surface without asking for definitions. You feel them in the tension that is released from your jaw, in the slow curve of your breath, in the gentleness that begins to unfold in your chest. These truths do not speak in sentences. They reveal themselves as sensations, a warm softness behind your ribs, a faint flutter beneath your sternum, a quiet pulse that spreads through you like low warm light. And each sensation deepens the ache without darkening it. You may sense the subtle shadow of longing, the kind that has no object, no story, only a feeling. It rises without form, without memory, without direction. A longing for something you can feel, but not name. And when it rises, the ache reacts by softening even more, as if it understands this nameless longing better than you do. The two feelings blend until you cannot tell where one ends and the other begins. The night holds all of this with gentle hands. It doesn't push. It doesn't question. It simply expands enough to let every delicate part of you breathe. And in that expansion, the ache becomes part of the quiet, something so integrated into the stillness that it almost feels like the night itself is breathing with you. Slow, warm, steady. Your thoughts move like soft tides now rising and falling without direction. They bring with them faint impressions from your day, small interactions, moments you glanced past, tiny emotions you didn't stop to acknowledge. These impressions return now, not to ask anything of you, but because the quiet has opened enough space for them to exist gently. And the ache hums underneath them, holding them with a kind of warmth that feels almost protective. You may feel a slight warmth spreading across your chest, not sharp and not bright, more like the glow of something quiet and alive. This warmth does not rush. It unfolds with the slow patience of the hour, settling deeper with each breath you take. And as it settles, the ache loses its edges, becoming a soft, fluid presence that fills the space where tension used to be. There is an honesty in this level of stillness, a kind that does not require explanation or understanding. It is the honesty of feeling without naming, sensing, without defining. You recognize the ache not because it reveals anything specific, but because it mirrors a part of you that is always present beneath everything, your tenderness, your depth, your quiet strength. And tonight, that tenderness feels closer than it usually does. Your breathing grows steadier. The quiet deepens. The warmth beneath your ribs expands enough for you to feel the ache as something almost soothing. It isn't trying to disappear. It isn't trying to grow. It is simply resting in the softness of the night, allowing you to feel yourself more clearly in its presence. The longer you sit in this stillness, the more natural the ache feels, not as a burden, but as a reminder that even in the quietest hours, you are still connected to something inside yourself that moves, feels, responds. Something gentle, something human, something that has survived every bright day and now unfolds in the safety of the dimness. Tonight, the ache is not a signal of emptiness. It is the quiet echo of your own depth, a soft murmur from the most tender parts of your inner world. And in this late, slow hour, it rests beside you, not as something to overcome, but as something to feel soft, warm, and alive beneath the calm the night has carefully held open for you. There is a softness in the deep hours of the night that feels almost weightless, as if the quiet has thinned itself into a gentle veil draped across your thoughts. It doesn't press. It doesn't linger heavily. It simply covers everything with a dim calm that slows your inner world until you can feel even the smallest movements inside your chest. And in that slowed down space, the ache within you shifts once again, not brighter, not heavier, just subtler, like a faint warmth settling deeper beneath your ribs. Your breath feels smoother now, sliding softly from inhale to exhale with a rhythm that matches the steady hush around you. Each breath carries a muted sense of release, not dramatic enough to call attention to itself, but steady enough to loosen the tension that once hid in the corners of your body. The ache responds to this looseness. It settles into the warm spaces beneath your sternum, warming them with a gentleness that feels almost like acceptance. The room feels distant again, its edges softened by the dimness. The darkness does not swallow the space. It simply dims it to a level where your inner world becomes easier to feel. The shadows don't intrude. They drift quietly against the walls, moving only when your breathing shifts the air. And within this dim landscape, the ache rests with a kind of quiet honesty, no longer asking for attention, only allowing itself to exist. You may notice that your thoughts no longer move like tides. They move like slow, wandering currents that drift through your mind without direction or purpose. They bring with them faint emotions, soft traces of things you brushed past earlier, gentle hints of feelings you didn't give room to. These emotions don't expand. They rise just enough for you to sense them, then dissolve back into the quiet. And the ache hums beneath them, holding their softness in place. There's a calmness that begins to settle through your limbs, a calmness that doesn't come from stillness alone. It comes from the recognition that you've been moving through the day with layers of emotion waiting quietly beneath the surface. The night gives those layers room to breathe, and when they breathe, the ache becomes less of a pulse and more of a quiet warmth resting behind every slow exhale. As the hour deepens, the quiet around you feels almost like water, thick, slow, softly enveloping. You move through it, gently sensing its subtle resistance against your thoughts. This resistance doesn't push you away from anything. It slows you down just enough to feel the deeper currents within you. And in those currents, the ache becomes clearer, not because it grows, but because your mind has quieted enough for its subtleties to surface. You might feel a small pulling sensation inside your chest, the kind that doesn't hurt, but hints at something tender, resting beneath the layers of your day. This pull isn't asking for answers. It isn't tied to any specific memory or moment. It is simply the quiet reminder that you feel deeply, even when you do not speak those feelings aloud. And tonight, the ache sits at the center of that depth, warm and gentle. Your breathing slows even further. The quiet thickens. The darkness settles like a soft curtain. And in that curtain, the ache doesn't disappear. It blends, merging with the dimness until it feels like part of the atmosphere around you. It holds its shape only enough for you to sense it between breaths, a muted warmth that steadies your heart. You may find yourself remembering moments not for their importance, but for the small emotions they carried. A glance that lingered longer than expected. a silence that felt deeper than you realized, a thought you dismissed during the day, but that returns now with softened edges. These moments rise like gentle ripples across your awareness, and each ripple reveals another layer of the ache, another strand of tenderness woven into your inner world. There is something about this hour that encourages honesty without pressure. You do not need to explain anything to yourself. You simply feel. And in feeling, the ache becomes less of a mystery. It becomes a presence that reflects the softest parts of you, the parts that long quietly care deeply and carry emotions without needing them to form into words. The night holds this quiet honesty with remarkable gentleness. It doesn't amplify your emotions. It steadies them. It makes space for their subtlety, allowing the ache to sit with you without becoming heavy. In this steadiness, you begin to sense that the ache is not something separate from your calm. It is part of it, an echo of the depth you carry inside, even on days when you do not notice it. Your thoughts drift again, slower, now moving, like soft clouds across the inner sky of your mind. And the ache drifts with them, following their motion, without altering its shape. It does not press against your chest anymore. It rests there warm and quiet, like the faint glow of a distant ember that refuses to burn out, but also refuses to flare. The longer you sit in this dim hush, the more you recognize the ache as something almost peaceful. It is a gentle reminder that your emotions remain alive and present beneath every layer of quiet strength. It does not demand understanding. It does not require resolution. It simply asks you to acknowledge the tenderness that lives inside you. Tonight, the ache does not define you. It reflects you. It mirrors the softness you carry, the sensitivity you rarely reveal, the quiet way your heart continues to feel, even when the world has gone silent. And as the hour drifts forward, the ache remains not heavy, not lingering, just warm and steady in the deepest part of the night. There is a certain stillness that settles into the late night hours, a stillness so soft, so quietly encompassing, that it feels almost like a presence resting against your skin. It moves gently, without intention, without sound, as if the darkness itself has taken on a warm breathing form. In that tender presence, the ache inside you changes once again. It grows neither bigger nor smaller. It becomes quieter, finer, as if it is thinned into a soft thread woven through your breathing. Your inhale drifts through your chest with a smoothness that feels almost delicate, collecting the coolness of the air. And when you exhale, the warmth inside, you deepen subtly, warming the ache in a way that makes it feel more like a soft glow than an emotion. The ache responds to every breath, now rising and falling, with a rhythm so gentle it barely feels like movement. It rests beneath your ribs with a quiet steadiness, as if it has finally found the exact place where it can breathe without disturbing you. The room around you feels quiet in a way that doesn't require your attention. You don't need to look around to sense the dimness. You feel it in the slow settling of your thoughts, in the still softness of your limbs, in the warm hush that moves through your inner world. The shadows around you no longer feel separate. They blend into the quiet, creating a space that feels both infinite and intimately close. And within that space, the ache inside you becomes more recognizable, not as pain, but as presence. Your thoughts drift again, but differently now. They move with a softness that feels intentional, even though nothing about this hour asks you to think at all. They float into your awareness like thin layers of light, carrying faint impressions of things you felt without noticing. A moment earlier in the day, when your attention wavered, a softness in your chest you brushed aside, a quiet longing that whispered and disappeared before you could reach for it. These impressions rise now, not to trouble you, but to settle gently around the ache. You may notice that your chest feels slightly heavier, not in a way that restricts you, but in a way that grounds you. This heaviness is warm, familiar, almost comforting. It's the feeling that comes when your emotions finally find a place to rest. And the ache softened by the night nestles into that heaviness with a quiet acceptance. It no longer trembles. It no longer reaches. It simply rests, steady and warm, beneath the slow steadying of your breath. The deeper the hour becomes, the more your inner world widens. Emotions that once felt sharp soften into blurred edges. Thoughts that once felt tangled loosen into strands. Even the quiet itself feels deeper, no longer just around you, but within you, alive, warm, attentive. And in that depth, the ache thins further, stretching into a muted shimmer that arcs gently through your chest. You may feel a faint, warm flutter behind your sternum, a flutter that rises only when your breath deepens enough to touch the most tender parts of your inner landscape. This flutter isn't tied to any single emotion. It is the subtle movement of everything you've carried quietly, the softness, the longing, the unspoken tenderness. The ache responds to it with more warmth, as if acknowledging something inside you that has waited for this hour to be felt. Your thoughts shift again, slower, now moving like soft waves across a dim horizon. They carry no urgency, no purpose. They exist only as gentle motion, keeping your inner world alive in the stillness. And the ache moves with them, following their pace without altering its shape. It exists so quietly now, woven almost seamlessly into your breathing, that it feels more like part of the night than part of you. There may be a moment when you sense something loosening inside your chest, not breaking, not releasing, just loosening. A soft undoing of the tension you didn't know was there. This loosening doesn't make the ache disappear. It makes it softer, more transparent, easier to sit with. It becomes a warm thread of emotion, stretched through the quiet, touching nothing with weight and everything with gentleness. The night holds this gentle unraveling with remarkable care. It doesn't rush you toward understanding. It doesn't pull you toward memories. It lets you feel in the simplest, softest way, through breath, through warmth, through the quiet ache that hums beneath your ribs. And in that letting, you begin to sense the deeper truth of the ache, that it is not something wrong. It is something alive. You may feel a quiet calm spreading through your limbs, settling into your fingers, your shoulders, your throat. It moves slowly, a warmth that does not come from the room, but from the softening of your inner world. This calm fills you without asking permission, creating a deep, muted stillness that the ache fits into perfectly. And in that stillness, the ache becomes almost soothing, a warm presence that steadies your breath rather than disturbing it. As the hour continues to drift forward, you sink deeper into this softness. The darkness feels warmer. The quiet feels thicker. The ache feels more like a gentle pulse of emotion than a weight. It glows faintly beneath your sternum, steady as a dim ember that refuses to fade completely. And you recognize that this ember is not something to extinguish. It is something to feel softly, quietly, fully. Tonight, the ache does not pull you into memory or longing. It draws you inward toward the tender place where your emotions rest without needing to be named. It shows you the depth inside your quiet. It reveals the warmth beneath your stillness. It reminds you that even in the deepest parts of the night, something within you continues to glow. And as you breathe into that glow, now the ache remains with you, not heavy, not bright, just warm enough to let you know you are still here, still feeling, still softly alive in the dimness. There is a depth the night reaches where everything becomes so still, so quietly suspended that even your own breathing feels like a soft ripple moving through warm darkness. Nothing rushes here. Nothing strains. The quiet has settled into its gentlest form, wrapping itself around you like a thin layer of dim air. And in that softened air, the ache inside you shifts into something even quieter, something warm, faint and steady, like a lingering glow that refuses to disappear, but no longer asks to be understood. Your breath moves slowly, each inhale expanding your chest with a muted stretch, each exhale thinning the space within you until all that remains is warmth. The ache responds to this warmth with a gentleness that feels almost tender. It stays beneath your ribs, humming in slow pulses that mirror the rhythm of the hour. It doesn't press or pull anymore. It simply rests, present enough to be felt, soft enough to soothe. The darkness around you feels calmer than before, no longer holding the subtle tension of earlier hours. It has softened into a warm dimness, a dimness that feels not empty, but filled with a faint living quiet. This quiet doesn't isolate you. It holds you, enveloping your thoughts in a stillness that smooths their edges until they feel more like gentle movements than actual ideas. And within those movements, the ache pulses gently, aligning itself with the soft gravity of the night. You may feel your mind drifting again, but the drifting has become slower, deeper. It's less like wandering thoughts and more like gentle currents moving beneath the surface of your awareness. These currents carry faint sensations, subtle flickers of tenderness, small waves of warmth, lingering threads of emotions you tucked away earlier. They rise and fall in your chest with the same soft rhythm as your breath. And the ache moves with them, blending so seamlessly into these currents that it becomes part of the quiet itself. There is a stillness behind your sternum now, a stillness warm enough to feel alive. It holds the ache gently, almost reverently, as though the night understands the fragility of the emotions resting there. This stillness doesn't ask you to name anything. It gives you space to simply feel. And in that space, the ache becomes almost like a soft inner lantern, dim, steady, faintly glowing in the warm hush of the hour. You might sense a subtle expansion in your chest, not sharp and not bright, but slow and warm, like something inside you stretching into the quiet with delicate intention. This stretching doesn't feel like a need. It feels like permission for your emotions to loosen, to widen, to breathe. And the ache widens with them, thinning further into a soft, warm presence that rests against your ribs like a whisper of light. In this deep quiet, your emotions do not rise in waves. They rise in threads, thin, gentle lines of feeling that soften rather than swell. A faint longing, a quiet tenderness, a soft ache that carries no story. They weave together, slowly forming a warm haze within your chest. And the ache moves through that haze, steady and patient, warming each thread until the entire inner space feels wrapped in a muted glow. The darkness feels heavier now, but not with weight, with warmth. It drapes over everything around you, softening the room into shapes you don't need to define. The edges blur, the shadows deepen, the quiet thickens around your limbs. And in all of this soft thickening, the ache inside you becomes even gentler, as if the night is cushioning it, smoothing it, shaping it into something you can hold without effort. You may notice your breathing slowing further, almost sinking into your body rather than rising through it. This sinking feels natural grounding. It draws you inward toward the warm center of your chest, where the ache now rests like a calm, glowing presence. It no longer feels like something you carry. It feels like something that simply exists, a quiet emotion woven into the fabric of your inner world. There are moments when a faint heaviness brushes against your throat, a heaviness not made of sadness, but of tenderness, a subtle swelling of emotion that feels like a soft reminder of everything you felt quietly throughout your life. And when this tenderness rises, the ache warms in response, matching its softness, holding it gently, allowing it to linger without overwhelming you. Your mind may drift toward fragments of feelings rather than memories, the warmth of a glance, the softness of a thought, the quiet shape of an emotion you never fully expressed. These fragments carry no weight. They float through your awareness like dim lights passing behind fog. The ache glows beneath them, steady and patient, as if understanding that not everything has to be remembered. Some things only need to be felt. The deeper the night becomes, the more natural it feels to sit with the ache. It has softened so much that it feels less like an ache and more like a quiet warmth, a warmth that reminds you you're still connected to your own depth, your own tenderness, your own quiet humanity. It doesn't ask you to confront anything. It only asks you to breathe with it, to feel its warmth resting gently in the dimness. Your body feels heavier now, grounded by calm rather than tiredness. The air feels warmer. The shadows feel thicker. The quiet feels deeper. And within all of that, the ache rests in its most tender form, soft, warm, steady, alive. If you listen closely, you may sense that the ache is no longer pulsing. It is simply glowing, a faint ember inside you, a gentle reminder of your emotional landscape, a warm presence holding the softest parts of your inner world. Tonight, the ache is not something to move through or rise above. It is something to sit beside quietly, gently, warmly, as the night wraps itself around you in the dim, tender stillness of these deep hours. There is a stage of the night when the quiet stops, feeling like something outside of you, and begins to feel like something you're breathing in. It settles deeper now, softer and warmer than before, carrying a kind of stillness that spreads through your chest with a slow, steady calm. The air feels thicker, not with weight, but with softness, as though the darkness has cushioned itself into a gentle presence. And within that presence, the ache inside you takes on a new shape, thin, warm, almost translucent, like a dim light resting beneath layers of quiet. Your breath expands gently as you inhale, rising through your chest like a soft tide. And when you exhale, something loosens a warmth that begins behind your sternum and spreads outward in delicate waves. The ache responds to these waves, melting into their rhythm, settling deeper into the warm space beneath your ribs. It no longer feels like a pressure or a pulse. It feels like a soft glow, as if the night has smoothed it into its most gentle form. The room feels quieter than ever, though nothing has changed. The shadows rest as they always have. The dimness has not shifted, but your perception has. You feel the silence differently, closer, heavier, but only in warmth. It rests against your skin like a soft veil and gathers around your senses until every movement inside you slows into something tender. And in that tenderness, the ache blends so seamlessly into your breathing that it becomes hard to tell where the quiet ends and where the ache begins. Your thoughts drift through this quiet with a slow, gentle motion. They no longer surface sharply. They no longer brush against memories with intensity. Instead, they move like soft currents beneath dim light, steady, patient, effortless. They carry with them faint impressions, the warmth of a moment you barely noticed, the echo of a thought you didn't linger on, the softness of an emotion you didn't allow yourself to feel earlier. These impressions rise not to demand attention, but to settle near the ache with delicate ease. You may feel a gentle fullness in your chest, not heavy, but warm, like a soft swelling of emotion that has been waiting for the quiet to reveal itself. This fullness is not sadness. It is not longing. It is something softer, more diffuse, a tender warmth made of quiet truths that live beneath the surface of your thoughts. And when this fullness rises, the ache warms with it, aligning itself to that tenderness in a way that feels instinctively human. The night deepens further, stretching into a calm that feels almost tangible. The air seems to hold you gently, as if the darkness itself has shaped a warm, silent space around your body. In this space, the ache feels small, not diminished, but softened, like a gentle echo instead of a steady hum. It rests beneath your heartbeat with a warmth that feels patient, quiet, alive. Your breathing slows again, sinking deeper into your body. Each inhale feels like it gathers the faint glow of the ache, and each exhale spreads that glow through your chest. It moves without direction, without force, simply expanding into the warm silence as though it belongs here. And in this expansion, you begin to feel the ache not as something separate from you, but as part of the softness that night has uncovered within you. There may be a moment when a thin layer of emotion rises behind your eyes, not sharp, not bright, just a faint warmth that hints at your depth. It does not press for release. It does not swell. It stays small, resting gently behind your awareness, as if acknowledging something inside you without asking you to name it. And when it settles, the ache settles with it, glowing faintly through the quiet. Your mind drifts again, but now the drifting feels deeper, more fluid. It carries you into softer layers of thought, places where emotions do not need form, where tenderness rests without explanation, where the quiet feels almost sacred. And the ache rests within those layers, warm and steady, like a small ember tucked into the dimness. In this deep stillness, you may sense the faintest tremble of vulnerability, not sharp enough to hurt, but soft enough to feel. It rises like a warm pulse from the center of your chest, blending into the ache and turning it into something whole, something tender, fragile, yet undeniably warm. This vulnerability is not weakness. It is the quiet recognition of your emotional depth, the gentle awareness of how deeply you feel, even when the world does not see it. The deeper the night becomes, the more natural it feels to sit with these emotions. They are not loud. They do not overwhelm. They rest quietly wrapped in the softness of the hour breathing with you settling with you. And the ache thin and warm becomes the soft glow within them, the gentle reminder that your heart remains open even in silence. Your limbs grow heavier, not from exhaustion, but from calm. Your breath deepens into your belly. The air feels warmer around your shoulders, and the ache softened to its gentlest shape becomes something close to comfort. It rests beneath the quiet like a soft hand, steady, present, tender. Tonight, the ache does not seek attention. It does not pull you into thought. It simply stays close, glowing faintly beneath the dim hush, reminding you of your own softness. It is not something to move through. It is something to feel. Something that reveals who you are beneath the noise, quiet, tender, deeply alive in the stillness of the night. And as the hour drifts onward, the ache remains beside you, warm, delicate, steady, like a soft breath resting in the center of your chest. There is a depth the night slips into, where the quiet feels almost like a soft tide rising and falling against the edges of your thoughts without ever making a sound. It moves through the room with a gentleness that feels deliberate, almost careful, as though it doesn't want to disturb the tenderness that is gathered inside your chest. And in this low, warm tide, the ache you've been carrying softens again, losing even more of its shape until it becomes something like a faint warmth that simply rests beneath your ribs. Your breathing feels slower now, deeper, as though your body has aligned itself to the rhythm of the stillness around you. Each inhale draws the dim softness of the air into your chest, and each exhale releases a warmth that spreads through you like a quiet comfort. The ache moves with this warmth rising when you breathe in and settling when you breathe out. It no longer asks for your attention. It only asks for space, and the night has opened that space for it completely. The shadows along the walls feel softer than before, their edges blurred by the dimness. Nothing in the room calls for your focus. Nothing feels sharp or demanding. The quiet holds everything in place with a kind of slow, gentle gravity. And within that gravity, the ache feels almost like a natural part of the stillness, something woven into the fabric of the hour, neither separate nor overwhelming, simply warm and quietly present. Your thoughts drift again, not upward, not outward, but inward. They drift like small, soft particles moving through warm water. They don't form sentences. They don't chase meaning. They simply move, carrying with them delicate traces of emotion, tiny flickers of warmth, muted glimmers of tenderness, gentle shadows of feelings that never had time to rise during the day. And the ache floats among these traces, matching their slow rhythm. There may be a moment when you feel a subtle brightness in your chest, not light in the literal sense, but an emotional brightness, a faint swelling of warmth that feels almost like the beginning of a sigh. This brightness does not grow into anything sharp. It lingers softly, illuminating the ache from within, turning it into something thin and glowing instead of something dense. The night deepens around you, and this glow deepens with it. You might feel the air thickening slightly as the hour stretches on, not heavy, just warmer, more saturated with quiet. This warmth wraps around your shoulders and settles lightly at the base of your throat. And in that settling, the ache loosens further, smoothing into a steady, muted pulse that moves with your breath. It becomes so gentle that it barely feels like an emotion anymore. It feels more like a soft reminder of your own depth. The night holds all of this in place with effortless calm. It allows your inner world to stretch, to soften, to breathe. It allows the ache to take on forms it never reveals during brighter hours. It lets you feel without needing to understand. And this freedom to feel without interpreting is what makes the ache so gentle now, so warm, so easy to sit beside. Your breathing deepens again. The quiet presses closer, not with weight, but with warmth. And in that warmth, the ache begins to feel almost like a companion, a quiet presence that sits beside you in the dimness, neither asking nor offering, simply resting. It hums softly beneath your sternum, aligning itself to the slow expansion and contraction of your chest. You may sense a faint trembling at the center of your heart, not from fear or sorrow, but from vulnerability, pure, unfiltered vulnerability that rises only when the world has quieted enough for you to feel your own softness. This trembling moves through you like a subtle wave, touching the ache and blending into it until the two feelings become one warm, quiet current drifting beneath the surface. Your mind drifts deeper into this softness. You feel emotions not with clarity, but with presence. They rise as warm impressions. They fall as gentle dissolving. And in their movement, the ache becomes even smoother, like a single thread of warmth stretching through the center of your chest, unbroken, steady, tender. There may be a moment when you feel the weight of the room disappear, leaving only the sensation of your breath and the quiet glow of the ache. It feels like floating not upward, not away, but inward, as though you are drifting into a deeper layer of yourself, where everything is muted, softened, and safe. The night wraps around this layer with gentle hands, holding it with more care than the day ever can. The ache now feels less like something you are aware of and more like something you are inhabiting, a warm space inside your chest where emotion and breath intertwine. It is neither sharp nor dull. It simply exists as a warm, muted presence, pulsing softly in time with the deepest quiet of the night. Your limbs grow heavier, your breath thicker, your mind quieter. The room fades into a dim haze. The air feels warm against your skin, and the ache rests in its smallest, softest form. It no longer asks to be felt. It no longer moves. It simply glows, faint, warm, steady, like a small ember held in the gentle darkness. Tonight, the ache is not a sign of anything unresolved. It is an echo of your inner tenderness, a reflection of the quiet depth you carry, a soft pulse of something human and delicate that the night has revealed with remarkable care. And as the hour drifts forward, the ache stays with you, warm, quiet, deeply gentle, resting at the center of your chest as if it were meant to be there all along. There is a stage of the night so deep, so quietly settled, that even your own breathing begins to sound like part of the darkness. It doesn't echo. It doesn't drift. It simply folds into the silence, softening until it feels like a gentle motion within a space that has stopped moving altogether. In this depth, the ache inside you becomes almost weightless. It no longer rests beneath your ribs with the warmth it carried earlier. It thins, stretching into a faint, warm layer that lies quietly across your chest, like dim light pressed into stillness. Your inhale enters with a softness that feels almost unreal, as though the air has thickened into something warmer, gentler, easier to carry. And with each exhale, the warmth within you expands, spreading into the quiet with slow, muted waves. The ache moves with these waves. It doesn't break. It doesn't sharpen. It flows calm, steady, unhurried. It has become so gentle that its presence almost blends into the background of the night. The room around you feels distant again, but in a softer way, as though the darkness has drawn its edges in closer to keep the stillness intact. Nothing feels separate. Nothing feels sharp. The walls, the shadows, the dim air, everything rests together in one quiet field of softness. And within that field, your inner world mirrors the same quiet. Your thoughts float as lightly as dust in warm air. Your emotions rest in muted shades, never rising too quickly, never sinking too deeply. And the ache hums through all of it with a warmth that feels both tender and familiar. You may sense a slight fullness behind your sternum, a fullness that doesn't create pressure, but signals the presence of something alive beneath the quiet. This fullness is subtle, like a quiet breath that didn't expand fully. It feels like a soft reminder of everything unspoken, everything you moved past too quickly, everything your heart touched softly without holding. And when this fullness rises, the ache glows a little brighter, not sharply, not suddenly, but with a warmth that blooms through the tender space inside you. The hour deepens further, and the quiet thickens again, not heavy, but dense with softness. You can almost feel the air pressing lightly against your skin, like a warm hand placed on your shoulder. This gentle weight grounds you, sinking into your limbs with a calm that feels effortless. And in that groundedness, the ache shifts once more. It becomes something closer to a pulse, slow, steady, muted. A quiet sign that some part of you is still awake, still feeling, still moving beneath the dimness. Your thoughts drift deeper now, not as ideas, but as shapes, soft shapes that rise briefly before dissolving into the warm darkness. They carry remnants of emotion, the faintest threads of feelings that have stretched through your day, through your week, through your quiet inner moments. A flicker of tenderness, a breath of longing, a quiet recognition of something you never fully named. These shapes do not overwhelm. They drift lightly, brushing against the ache just enough to remind you of its presence. You may feel a delicate trembling inside your chest, not from fear and not from sadness, but from a tenderness that has nowhere to go except inward. This trembling is soft, almost imperceptible, like a faint flutter behind your heartbeat. It rises only enough for you to sense it, then folds back into the quiet. And when it does, the ache moves, with it warm, gentle, steady, as though the two sensations are weaving themselves together in silence. The night feels patient with you, holding your quiet vulnerability with an ease you rarely find when sunlight fills the world. It allows you to feel without pressure, to rest inside emotion without needing to understand it. And the ache responds to this patience by softening even more. It becomes a small, glowing presence that seems to pulse with the rhythm of the hour, dim, steady, quietly alive. There may be moments when memories brush against your awareness, but they come stripped of sharpness. They appear only as textures, warm, muted impressions that rise like soft waves. A moment when your heart felt full, a moment when it felt thin, a silence that lingered a little too long, a hope that flickered briefly, then disappeared into routine. These impressions drift through you without anchoring themselves. They move the way late night emotions do, slow, honest, tender. Your breathing deepens again. The quiet pulls you inward, drawing you into the warm center of yourself, where the ache now rests more gently than ever. It feels like a small ember tucked deep beneath your ribs, glowing faintly in a darkness that has learned to hold it with care. It doesn't pulse for attention. It doesn't reach for understanding. It exists simply as a warm trace of your own depth. The deeper the night becomes, the more naturally you settle into this warmth. Your limbs grow heavier, your mind quieter, your chest softer. The ache aligns itself with this softness, thinning into something that feels more like presence than emotion. It becomes the calm beneath the calm, the warmth beneath the stillness, the quiet beneath the quiet. If you sit with this feeling long enough, you may sense that the ache is not something to soothe or resolve. It is something that reveals, something that opens a quiet door inside you, something that lets you see how tender you truly are beneath every layer of your day. And tonight, in this dim hour, that tenderness feels safe enough to breathe. The ache no longer feels like a question or a longing. It feels like a soft confirmation of your inner world, a gentle acknowledgement that your depth exists even in silence, that your heart remains open even in stillness, that you are quietly, deeply alive beneath the calm of the night. And as the hour drifts forward, the ache stays with you, thin, warm, steady resting, like a small ember glowing at the center of your chest. There is a depth to the late night where even silence feels layered, where the quiet gathers into a soft density that holds your entire inner world without letting anything spill or drift too far. It settles gently, spreading through the room with a warmth that feels almost like a slow exhale resting across your skin. And in this soft, dense quiet, the ache inside you shifts into its most delicate form, yet thin, warm, almost airy, like a faint glow, suspended beneath your ribs. Your breath moves through this quiet with a gentler rhythm than before. Each inhale feels like it brushes against something soft inside your chest, and each exhale leaves behind a warmth that spreads out just enough to smooth the edges of whatever you're feeling. The ache responds to this softness. It settles deeper, not with weight, but with warmth, aligning itself to the slow rise and fall of your breathing, as though it has learned to breathe with you. The darkness around you feels warm now, not heavy. It is thickened into a kind of stillness that doesn't pull you inward or outward. It simply holds you where you are suspended in a quiet that feels almost weightless. The room itself seems to float a little, its outlines softened, its shadows blurred into gentle, motionless shapes. And within this softened space, the ache becomes almost indistinguishable from the silence around you. Your thoughts drift again, but in the slowest motion yet. They move like faint ripples spreading across still water, never loud, never forceful, never urgent. These thoughts carry with them only the quietest traces of emotion, a distant tenderness, the faint echo of longing, the soft sheen of something unspoken. They drift with so little intention that they barely feel like thoughts at all. And the ache moves with them, glowing faintly through the dimness inside you. You might feel a subtle opening in your chest, a small stretch of warmth that blooms slowly behind your sternum. This opening doesn't come from memory or anticipation. It comes from the softness the night has carved out inside you. It feels like the quiet itself has created a gentle space for your emotions to rest in their most fragile form, and the ache sensing that space spreads into it carefully, like a thin layer of dim light settling across warm shadows. Your breathing softens again, sinking deeper into your body. The air feels warmer, like it has soaked up some of the quiet surrounding you, and the ache responds to this warmth with a subtle hum, barely noticeable but undeniably present. It hums like a small, steady reminder of something tender within you that has waited patiently for the night to become gentle enough for it to surface. The deeper the hour becomes, the more your inner world loosens. Emotions that once felt contained begin to stretch across your chest in thin lines of warmth. These lines do not tangle or twist. They simply widen, making more space for the ache to exist without pressing, without pulling, without trying to mean anything specific. They create a soft field of feeling within you, a place where everything is muted, calm, and quietly alive. There may be a moment when you sense the faintest tremble behind your breathing, a tremble not made of fear or sadness, but of tenderness, the kind that only rises when the world is quiet enough for you to feel your own depth. This tremble moves through your chest, slowly touching the ache as it passes, and the ache warms in response, settling even more deeply into the quiet space the night has opened within you. Your thoughts soften into shapes again. They drift across the dimness in slow arcs, carrying no urgency, no narrative, nothing that needs to be solved. They move simply because your mind is still awake in its quietest form, aware enough to feel, but not sharp enough to analyze. And the ache stays with them, following their gentle motion until it becomes more of a quiet glow than a feeling. The night holds all of this with remarkable calm. Its stillness feels intentional, as though it understands the fragility of the emotions resting inside you. It keeps the quiet steady and warm, cushioning the ache so that it no longer feels like something you carry. It feels more like something that accompanies you, softening every corner of your inner landscape. You may feel your body sinking deeper into itself, your limbs heavier, your shoulders softer, your breathing slower. This sinking is not exhaustion. It is the natural pull of the quiet drawing you into the tender center of your own emotional world. And in that center, the ache settles into the warmest shape you felt, yet thin as breath, warm as dim light, steady as a soft heartbeat. There's no need to name this feeling, no need to define it. It exists only as presence, as warmth, as quiet. It reveals nothing specific and hides nothing either. It simply reflects the softness inside you, the tenderness you carry, the quiet depth that becomes visible only in the deepest parts of the night. Tonight, the ache no longer feels like a question or a longing. It feels like a small, fragile truth about who you are beneath every layer of calm. It glows softly beneath your ribs, steady and gentle, reminding you that even in stillness, something inside you remains deeply alive. And as the hour moves forward in its slow, warm drift, the ache stays close softer than ever, lighter than ever, resting quietly at the center of your chest. There is a point in the night when the quiet enters a softness so deep it begins to feel like a kind of atmosphere, warm, slow, and weightless. It doesn't gather around you anymore. It moves through you, filling the subtle spaces between your breaths, sinking gently into the warm center of your chest. And in this softened atmosphere, the ache inside you shifts into its faintest, warmest form, so light you might miss it if you weren't paying attention. yet so steady it never fully disappears. Your breath glides in with a smoothness that feels almost tender. It meets the warmth inside you without resistance, and as you exhale, the quiet spreads deeper, settling softly into your ribs. The ache moves in these subtle currents, rising barely, with each inhale sinking slightly with each exhale. It no longer pulses. It no longer stretches. It rests as though it has found a place within you where it no longer has to move at all. The room feels suspended in a dim stillness that doesn't change shape or temperature. The shadows are soft, blending into the warm dark without forming sharp edges. Even your awareness feels cushioned, now wrapped in a muted calm that smooths everything it touches. And within this smoothing, the ache drifts into the background, warm and thin and steady, like a quiet ember that glows without flickering. Your thoughts drift in the same softened rhythm. They appear as faint impressions, gentle shapes rather than ideas. A feeling that brushed your chest earlier, a warmth you didn't have time to sit with, a tenderness that surfaced for only a moment before dissolving into the pace of your day. These impressions rise now with delicate slowness, resting lightly at the edge of your awareness before floating away again. And the ache glows beneath them, responding to each impression with the same warm steadiness. You may feel a subtle swelling behind your sternum, a fullness not tied to any memory or desire. It feels like the quiet expanding within you, softening the air in your lungs, smoothing your heartbeat into an even calmer rhythm. This swelling is not heavy. It is warm, delicate, almost luminous, and the ache spreads into it, thinning into a warm layer that fills the center of your chest without pressing outward. The deeper the hour becomes, the more your inner world feels like a dim room filled with soft air. Emotions no longer feel separate from each other. They blend into a warm haze, indistinct and gentle. A hint of longing, a trace of tenderness, a quiet ache that has dimmed into warmth. All of it exists in one slow, steady field of feeling uninterrupted, unbroken, untouched by any need for clarity. Your breathing deepens a little more, settling into a rhythm that feels instinctively right for this hour. The quiet hums through your ribs. The darkness wraps itself around your limbs with a weight that feels comforting. And the ache glows in its smallest shape, a soft, warm presence tucked beneath your heart, neither strong nor weak, simply real in the gentlest possible way. There may be a moment when you sense how fragile your emotions feel in this dimness, not fragile as in breakable, but fragile as in tender, delicate, precious. The ache mirrors that fragility. It is softened so much that it no longer feels like feeling at all. It feels like awareness, an awareness of your own depth, your own capacity to feel quietly and deeply without losing yourself in the emotion. Your thoughts drift through this awareness, moving in slow circles. They do not form questions. They do not seek answers. They simply move with the quiet floating through the warm air inside your chest in gentle arcs. And with each slow arc, the ache settles further into its dim glow, as though your inner world has become a soft cradle meant to hold it without pressure. You may notice a faint trembling beneath the warmth, a subtle vibration that hums through your chest like a small, delicate breath you haven't fully released. This trembling doesn't grow or fade. It stays at a steady, quiet frequency, mirroring the vulnerability inside you that only the deepest night can reveal. and the ache responds to it with a glow that feels almost like comfort. The shadows in the room feel closer now, not looming, but warm enough to wrap around the edges of your awareness. They hold the quiet in place. They keep the stillness steady. They create a kind of emotional cocoon where nothing rises sharply, nothing presses, nothing breaks. And inside this cocoon, the ache remains soft and small, glowing just beneath your sternum like a gentle pulse of warmth. Your breath slows again. The quiet feels softer. Your body grows heavier, not with fatigue, but with calm, as if the night has given you permission to sink fully into yourself. And when you do, the ache stretches into its thinnest shape, becoming almost imperceptible. Almost, but not quite. It stays present, warm and subtle, a quiet reminder that something inside you is still awake, still alive, still tender in the dim, slow hours. There are emotions that can only be felt in this depth of night, emotions too soft for daylight, too delicate for movement, too warm for noise. The ache belongs to those emotions. It glows in their softness. It breathes in their quiet. It exists not as a call for attention, but as a quiet mirror held up to the gentlest parts of who you are. Tonight, the ache is not something you're moving through. It is something you are resting beside a soft, warm truth of your own inner quiet. And as the night deepens just a little further, the ache stays with you, thin, warm, steady, like a faint ember glowing peacefully at the center of your chest. There is a depth to the night that almost feels like an ending. Quiet, slow, softened to the point where the darkness no longer surrounds you, but rests gently against your skin, as if it has settled into the same pace as your breath. Nothing feels distant now. Nothing feels sharp. The room, the quiet, the dim air, they've all blended into a single warm stillness that holds your inner world with the lightest possible touch. And in that last stretch of night, the ache inside you settles into the softest form it has taken so far, thin as breath, warm as dim light, steady as a slow pulse that no longer needs to rise or fall. Your inhale moves through your chest without resistance, filling the warm space beneath your ribs with a gentleness that barely feels like movement. And when you exhale, the softness around you deepens as if the darkness itself leans closer, wrapping your entire emotional world in a quiet that feels almost protective. The ache rests fully in this quiet now. It does not glow brightly. It does not hum. It simply exists as a warm presence beneath your sternum, steady and faint, like the final ember of a long, soft fire. The room feels suspended in a dim haze that doesn't shift or expand. It holds its softness perfectly, as though the night has reached a point where it cannot grow deeper or quieter. The space around you seems to adapt to your breathing, expanding with your inhale, settling with your exhale. And in this synchronized rhythm, the ache blends so seamlessly into the quiet that it becomes part of the atmosphere inside your chest. Your thoughts drift in slow, gentle circles, tracing the faint outlines of emotions that no longer ask to be named. They drift not toward memory or meaning, but toward sensation, warmth, softness, tenderness. These impressions float through your awareness like slow-moving clouds across a dim horizon, and the ache rests beneath them, mirroring their softness, their steadiness, their faint glow. There may be a moment when you feel a slight rise of warmth behind your heart, a swelling so delicate it barely feels real. It isn't sadness. It isn't longing. It is simply the quiet recognition of your own depth, the part of you that can feel so softly, so silently, that the emotion never needs to sharpen to be real. This warmth touches the ache, gently smoothing it further into the dimness inside you. The night has loosened every tension in your body. Your limbs feel heavier, but comfortably, so as though gravity has softened into something warm and slow. Your shoulders rest more naturally. The air you breathe feels thicker with calm. And in this physical softening, the ache takes on a shape that feels almost like calm itself, warm, steady, muted, alive. Your awareness settles deeper into your chest. You feel the warmth there, the quiet thrum of your inner world moving at a pace so slow it barely registers as movement. The ache rests inside this warmth without shifting. It has reached a place where it no longer needs to unfold or reveal anything. It simply stays quiet, warm, present. Your thoughts move again, but they do not travel far. They drift as close as breath, carrying with them faint emotional traces, soft glimmers of tenderness, warmth, and vulnerability. These traces do not expand or fade. They hover suspended in the dimness, and the ache rests beneath them like a small anchor, keeping everything inside you steady and calm. There may be a subtle trembling deep inside your chest, not from fear, not from sorrow, but from the gentle awareness that you are feeling something in its purest, quietest form. This trembling is fragile in a way that feels almost sacred, as though it belongs only to moments like this, when the night becomes soft enough for your inner world to move without being disturbed. And the ache absorbs this trembling, smoothing it into warmth. Your breath slows again, matching the final quiet of the night. The air feels warmer with each exhale. Your chest loosens even more. And in that loosening, the ache thins into a quiet glow, barely there, yet unmistakably alive. It feels like the emotional residue of everything you felt tonight, gathered into one soft, steady ember. The darkness around you deepens into its final stillness. It holds your emotions with a gentleness that feels almost like understanding. Nothing sharp rises. Nothing dissolves. Everything rests exactly where it is meant to. And in this resting, the ache becomes something close to peace. Not the bright, clear kind. The dim, warm, tender kind that exists only when everything inside you has softened. You may notice a faint pressure behind your throat, not discomfort, but the subtle weight of emotion settling into its calmest form. This pressure does not rise. It stays small, warm, delicate, and the ache mirrors it, resting beneath your ribs, like a quiet presence that has no need to speak or be resolved. It simply exists as part of the softness. The deeper the quiet becomes, the more natural it feels to accept the ache, not as a feeling to move past, but as a companion to your inner stillness. It has traveled with you through every shift of the night, warming, glowing, thinning, settling. And now, in this final softness, it rests in its simplest form, a small ember glowing in the warm dark of your chest. Tonight, the ache is not a weight, a question, or a longing. It is a quiet truth, the truth that your heart is still tender, still open, still gently alive beneath every layer of calm. And as the night reaches its softest, deepest quiet, the ache remains with you, warm, thin, steady, a soft ember, glowing quietly at the center of your chest, exactly where it has belonged all along.